Well, I have here with me Eric Manis from the World Bank, a longtime friend of Pakistan. He's worked on Pakistan for a long time, done many good things, has lots of friends here, lots of admirers. I spoke to Khalid Mirza yesterday and he was speaking very highly of you and said, remember me to Eric. So Eric, the reason for asking this is, for this video is, we are holding a couple of webinars on the Competition Commission and the competitiveness of markets in this country, or the competition in the markets in this country. So I thought I should go back to you because you're one of the people who set up the Competition Commission. I mean, this was advised by the World Bank, it came through the World Bank. So I mean, so I basically, the first question I have in mind is, can you tell us the circumstances that led up to the development of the Competition Commission? And why did you set up a Competition Commission? Why not go in for deregulating the market before the competition?
Well, thank you, Nadeem. It's really an honor to be with you, and thank you for remembering me. Thank you for all my friends in Pakistan to remember me. Yes, it's been some time since I've been with you, and I miss you all very much and wish everybody the best and well-being at these difficult times. Going back to 2005 or so is both a interesting and enjoyable trip, because at that time we had a great dialogue about the role of the state, the role of the state in regulating the private sector. And we had one very important institution in the central bank, and we had strong leadership there. We had another very strong institution in that, and that was the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, and we had strong leadership. And I should also say, not just leadership, we had strong quality bureaucrats in these institutions, and that also distinguished them. So what we had there was a strong and independent regulation of the banking sector for stability and prudential strength, and we had strong independent regulatory oversight of the financial markets. What we didn't have was the third pillar. Let me also add that we also had a number of regulatory bodies that were emerging for telecommunication, for energy, and the like. And so the state was evolving to one where it was the primary runner of the economy, to one that was setting the rules and enforcing the rules. And I think the missing element in that paradigm, in that package, was the emphasis on a pro-competition framework for the private sector. And in this area, I would say that the Competition Authority had a very slightly different role than the others. And this was one of the most delicate aspects. The regulation is where the regulatory bodies participate in the market, voluntarily participate in that regulated market, whether it's telecom or banking or stockbroking, and they follow the rules of regulation. But competition is a natural right of every private sector participant. You don't naturally have to sign up for it. So as opposed to a regulatory body where they are telling you what you can do, Competition Authority is a quasi-judicial body to tell you what you cannot do. And so we had a slight wrinkle to the whole package, but still it was considered to be one of the important regulatory dimensions of a market economy.
But Eric, it seems to me, as you said yourself, and as Khalid Mirza pointed out in a webinar, and some of the Competition Commission people too, Joseph Wilson, that it's meant to be a quasi-judicial body and not necessarily a deregulation commission. Let's say in Australia, for example, it was a deregulation commission that was set up. In Pakistan, it seems to us that the major problem is deregulation. That the government is in every market, the government overregulates markets, the government has what we call a license Raj or permission Raj. Government stocks commodities, government stocks oil, government interferes in every market. We need major deregulation. Instead, what we got is a quasi-judicial body that's kind of now adding to the woes of the private sector and adding to the caseload. They've got about, I think, 12 years of cases pending with about 150 billion rupees worth of fine and all the business communities involved in competition. How do you feel about legal cases? How do you feel about that?
Well, I would say I haven't followed the most recent. I know that, as I said, participating in the judicial system is a slightly different dimension of a competition body than a regulatory body. It's like a referee on a soccer field. When the team goes onto the soccer pitch, they've agreed to certain rules, so the referee has all power. But as you're walking down the street, the referee doesn't have all power, you have all power, and now the referee, the policeman, the judge, the whatever, the competition commission can tell you only when you violated the rules. Now this becomes a very, very touchy business when it comes to individual and private sector rights, of course. So the rules, therefore, have to be very clear in terms of law, and any sort of law enforcement needs a proper due process, which is a review function. And if cases are not flowing, then yes, we have an issue with the judicial system generally. But moving to your second point, Nadeem, the question really is, at what point can a body that is meant to encourage competition in the private sector then have a voice that if the government, which has set up this body, would also like to participate in the private sector, it must follow the same rules, or it may choose not to participate in the private sector. But that becomes the role of advocacy, because as we've said, the law applies to the private sector and to any participant in the private sector, as I recall. Now, if and Khalid Mirza and the team discussed this at great length, the question always was, why does a reform-minded government need a competition body to tell it what is the right thing to do? And this is always the case. Because, therefore, the competition body is there to stand for certain rights and responsibilities. But the only way it can demonstrate that is through its law enforcement capabilities.
Well, let me tell you why this has become so important and why we are taking it up right now. Recently, the Imran Khan government initiated 2 commissions. In fact, 3 commissions, but 2 reports have come out. One is on the sugar crisis. Sugar prices were randomly going up and down, and people were very concerned. And so the report came out. And the report was heavily condemning the sugar lobby and how they manipulated the policy, and how they manipulated their own various exemptions, the export-import balance. Sometimes they could do export, sometimes they couldn't export. Sometimes imports were closed to benefit them, all these things. Then the independent power producers lobby, that also was investigated, and the report came out to show that the independent power producers have been getting, they were supposed to get an 18% return, you might remember, but they're getting 50, 60, 70% return because they're fixing all kinds of markets within the system. So the whole issue came up, where is the Competition Commission, what's happening? And and the issue that, hey, if the government is already helping these guys, these lobbies to make money, what is it that the competition commission can do? And that is why I come back to my subject, and we're going to have this webinar again within the 23rd, for which we're going to play your video, that my contention is we need a deregulation commission rather than a competition commission. And instead, we've got competition, which almost become toothless, and we can't deregulate the markets. So quite frankly, the way I look at it, Pakistan still doesn't have a free market, either in agriculture, commodities, in energy, in textiles, in sugar. There's no free markets because everywhere government is favoring some lobby or the other, or the government is directly involved. So what's your take on that? How would you react to that?
Well, I fully endorse the idea, the Australian, I forgot what they called the body.
Productivity Commission.
The Productivity Commission, which was not the Competition Commission. It was a separate body, and it was again, the idea that a reform-minded government would like to set up a set of experts to analyze itself. And I think that's a very, very laudable and important aspect. But this probably should not be conflated with the role of a competition commission, which really should have its eye on the private sector, primarily. You know, we also, at the time, had issues having to do with cartelization. We had issues having to do with dominance, and we had issues to do with mergers of the private sector. And these are very critical dimensions of an evolving economy, and therefore a transforming economy, especially nowadays with the technology revolution. We need a body to stay on top of how to protect the competition of the market when it's evolving so rapidly. Whilst on its side, I do believe in parallel, a government can set up a body similar to that in Australia, which was very effective. In fact, many World Bank staff came from that body in doing the technical analysis of the impact of regulations and the impact of how a regulation will affect the market, or how perhaps that a state-owned enterprise is affecting the market, etc. But I think this could be part of a competition authority's mandate in a situation where its law enforcement capacity was working smoothly, because that then gives it the credibility to carry out this second dimension of work. And I think what you've noted, Nadeem, is because of its inability to carry out its law enforcement capacity in an efficient and consumer-oriented manner, it doesn't have the credibility to carry out this technical work on advising the government. So that certainly is something to consider. We always felt, and I followed Khalid Mirza's leadership on this as the former head of the SECP, that a competition authority needed to speak quietly and carry a big stick, but it needed the big stick. Then it could speak quietly and people would listen. If it doesn't carry the stick, then I don't see that it has the authority or the mandate to be an advisor to the government, because it's not carrying out its primary role. So I recognize the point. Oh.
Eric, last question. Let me just came to my mind. If the norms of competition or antitrust have been changing, especially after the Microsoft case, the Google case, and the various cases, right now there seems to be far more regulatory or competition forbearance in the US, for example. They are allowing all kinds of mergers to take place, which we would have thought should not have taken place. So the whole ambit of competition, I think the definition is changing over time. But the thing that comes to mind is that to set up these commissions and regulatory bodies, and as you said, we've set up NEPRA, we've set up PEMRA, we've set up so many regulatory bodies. The one thing that worries me, and let me just raise it with you, since you've done a lot of this work, we don't have the research capacity. I mean, I remember when I looked at the Microsoft case, God, it was reams and reams of research that was carried out. Lots of consultants were hired, some very high-powered names were hired, and all kinds of, I think there was research of maybe about a few thousand pages there. Here, we don't have any capacity to do this work. And we set up these regulatory bodies without research capacity. How do you feel about that as somebody who's been on the other side of this?
Well, I will slightly disagree with the concept that Pakistan does not have the research capacity. I do believe that Pakistan does have the research capacity to do the basic work of analyzing markets. I believe that Pakistan has not geared its analytical strength in this direction. I shouldn't speak for Pakistan now. I haven't been with you in years. But at the time, we had, I completely agree. And we see now that you know, facts matter more than anything. And very much so in the field of economics to the extent that we can tease out facts. But Pakistan has always had top economists in many of the research institutes in Lahore, in Karachi, and we sought out many of these economists to advise us and participate. Where we had slight, I recall we had debates, and every competition commission has these debates, law versus economics. And, you know, those of us who are economists felt that there weren't enough economists, there weren't enough of the analytical capacity, because if I describe the value chain again, I should have said you start with law. Well, you start with research first, then you go to law, then you go to advocacy. And I completely agree. So I do agree that that's where the commission could have strengthened itself. And I think the bank should have done more. Khalid and I will always be disappointed that we didn't do more in the area of strengthening the analytical capacity. But you know, they're reaching out to PIDE, reaching out to the Lahore School, reaching out to the research institutes was always the idea of one of these bodies. So I do agree that research is important, but it was always a question of let's adjust the study of sectors to the study of markets. And that was always a you know, something we never quite accomplished, I would admit. So something to work on, Nadeem. You're muted, my friend.
As I said, let me start again. I said, Eric, thank you very much for giving us your time. And we will get you back to Pakistan again. As I said, you are remembered very fondly. Khalid Mirza, Moeen Afzal, many people speak very well of you. So inshallah, as this COVID gets over and flights again start and we can travel, we'll get you to come to at least PIDE and help us and do things for us.
Would be my honor, Nadeem. Thank you.
Thank you.